Colleagues, we are now at item 8 on the agenda, a corporate risk register, and I'll ask my namesake to introduce this item and to explain the situation with the papers, possibly to begin with.
Yeah, thanks, Boyd. And first of all, I'd like to apologise to board. The version has changed today. I managed to approve a version that was not wholly correct, and that was submitted to papers. So grateful to Rhiannon for doing an early repair job for today. The board risk register, corporate or high level risk register, is largely unchanged from January and is set out in the paper. The main material change to note is that instead of in public health, COVID and flu being the vaccinations where we consider there's risk, it's been decided to expand the risk to cover all vaccination to reflect the changeover in the vaccination transformation programme, so that the board holds responsibility for all the other vaccinations, and that therefore has been brought into the risk incorporated appropriately. The rating of all the risks is the same as we saw at last board meeting. The numbers in the scores changed slightly for the vaccination, I think, in public health, but I do not know that there was a material difference in any of the others. With Chair's indulgence, I would ask if any of the execs, on behalf of their governance committees and the risk holding execs, want to add anything to what I've said about their particular risks. I would ask that they put a hand up if they want to inform board of any other information that beyond my summary.
Fiona.
Yeah, just to confirm, I guess, that the Staff Governance Committee risks were reviewed at the meeting in March, and so we looked at the mitigating actions for those, and which we've tried to align where possible to the ADP. So we're making steady progress with them. There have been some delays, mainly around us doing the engagement around how we take the kind of culture aspects forward. And we felt it's important to get everyone kind of involved and engaged in that discussion as we sort of move that forward. So, but I think generally we took, I think it was moderate assurance from that report, and the committee were comfortable, but recognising there's still quite a lot of progress, particularly around areas like statutory and mandatory training, that we still need to make.
Thanks, Fiona. You were referring to those on page 5, number 632, 706, 1056, particularly.
That's right, yes.
Any other execs want to bring anything to our notice in terms of your own particular risks? Don't see any hands up, so with that, can go to questions. Susan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a small point of clarification, please, on risk 877 about engagement. I note that it doesn't actually have a governance committee oversight at the moment, except what you're saying, it's not, staff governance, but I wonder if you could say anything about where you think that might go for assurance. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I'm not sure if any other execs want to come in to assist me with this one. Feeling that rather than mislead board today, I think we would want to take that away, and actually I think Fiona may want to come in on it. Fiona.
Yeah, and I'm racking we did have a number of discussions at committee, and I'd say, yeah, the Staff Governance Committee agreed it would be more appropriate positioned elsewhere. I don't think we finally locked down the best place for that risk to go, and also I think there there was a desire to sort of update that risk in the light of having new risks around things like transformation as well, and whether or not there's a need for a standalone risk. So I maybe suggest we take that one back into EDG.
I think we had some discussion of that, Pam and Anne and others at a Monday morning meeting as well, and I think there was a feeling that this was a board level risk, but I'm not sure that there has been any particular landing on that yet, Susan. So your point is very pertinent. Alex.
Yeah, the Statman training risk very high still, and I appreciate why. Where are we with that? I'm not seeing any numbers. Are we improving? Is it plateaued? What's happening?
Yeah, happy to respond on that one. So yeah, I think the compliance with the training is improving slightly in some areas with the online training and the training we've got data for. There's been a particular focus in the last 3 months because of the improvement notice that we've got from HSE on a plan to get the New Craigs site with their practical violence and aggression training updated, and we're tracking and monitoring that plan that needs to be delivered by the end of June, and we're on track, or certainly were when we last looked at it 2 or 3 weeks ago, to make good progress. So I think we've been able to use that. Obviously that's been a requirement to focus quite a lot of resources quite intensively on the site with management and with the support colleagues, but I think it's also given us some insights about how we balance capacity, how we use the rostering tools to give us the best possible outcomes there. And there are separate pieces of work that we're going to be commissioning through EDG around looking longer term at the duration and content of that training, because things have moved on, I think, since we last reviewed it. So overall, there's still a lot of work to be done, but I think what the New Craigs position has shown us is that when it does have focus and we spend quite a lot of time and engage on the planning side of it, then we drive up not just the completion rates, but actually we reduce the number of no-shows, which is a challenge for our training as well. So I think, and we're commissioning an oversight group, not to drive forward the day-to-day management of making sure your colleagues do their statutory and mandatory training, but the broader issues about how do we change the system and the organisation of the training to make it easier to comply. So that's a piece of work that's coming to EDG for sign off in the next couple of weeks, and will be a short life working group initially around that.
Thanks, Fiona. Alex, want to come back on that?
No, thank you.
Right, thanks, Alex. Jerry next, and then Bert.
Thank you, Boyd. This was a question I was going to raise later on in the agenda, but I think given Alex raised Statman training, it's worthwhile making the observation at the moment. I did notice, I think it was in the equalities outcomes paper, that we're achieving plus 85, 90% on that aspect of Statman training, and I think it's within 2 weeks of start people have got to do it. And I just wonder if there was any approach to that particular area of Statman training which could be applied more widely across the board. Thank you.
Thanks.
Tim.
Yeah, happy to pick that one up initially, and if Tim's got any other points. Yeah, I think this is part of the suite of the online training that people do as part of the corporate induction, and we do typically find that compliance levels with that, although they vary depending on what kind of job people do, so more people who have desk-based jobs tend to comply than our frontline staff, because of access, etc. But actually we do find that those initial 6 or 7 modules tend to have quite high rates of completion, and I think that's partly driven again by the systems and processes around it. So we have a corporate induction portal. There's very clear steps and a clear point in time for people to go through that training. and so I think, again, that comes back to one of the things we want to look at is for the online training, maybe moving to a system where actually everybody does their refreshers at the same point after they've done their initial induction, so that rather than managers having to keep track of all their staff and all the different requirements in one quarter, you do a particular module for everyone in the organisation, and then it's much easier to manage. So I think there's, whilst we can't take away from that requirement for people to comply with what's needed, I think that ability to look at how we organise can help our compliance rates, and so that's what we want to do.
Did you want to add anything?
Well, not a lot. I mean, I think all is worth saying. I've got no reason to believe that the workforce are more interested in equality and diversity than any other issues that are included within Statman training. But I think, as Fiona was outlining, it's really around ease of access. It's around how straightforward it is, how much part of any induction or ongoing systems it is, and how straightforward it is to do. And I think it just lies simply with that.
Very okay. Thanks. Bert.
Thank you, Chair. It's on the same theme, Statman training. It's a really important subject for a whole host of reasons that I think everyone would understand. In my last visits, which I think took place in December, it was a topic that cropped up quite regularly by staff and by managers in relation to some of the challenges that they faced in terms of compliance. And of course, I fed all of this back into, well, certainly to Fiona. So I'm pleased to hear that there is a more overarching review taking place in relation to how the Statman situation can be improved. And I look forward to hearing how that can actually help to improve things. Thank you.
Thanks, Bert. Any other questions or contributions? I seem to recall in a past discussion, not necessarily on this particular topic, but Susan making a plea for a clearer representation of trajectories. And I think that would be a useful feature if we could do that going forward with the risk register, and quite simple things like that use of some color coding for high and very high would just help us to understand the picture more easily. And question of whether you put the very high ones first rather than group them under subject areas, so that you put all the very high ones first and then the high ones. That's a matter for Sarah and others to take forward in the future, but just a thought of making the information just a little bit more digestible. So if you have any thoughts on that, Boyd?
Yeah, thanks. Welcome the suggestions, other Boyd, and we'll take those on board. Thank you.
Okay. Any further points? If not, we're being asked to note the update on the strategic risk register, and we're being asked to take substantial assurance from it. Are we happy to do that? Okay, thank you. We move on then to item 9, the Code of Corporate Governance, and to some revision to the terms of reference of a couple of the committees. Ruth.
Thank you, Boyd. So yes, this refers back to the annual update to the Code of Corporate Governance that was agreed at your last board meeting. And at that time, I mentioned that there were a couple of the board's committees' terms of reference that had yet to go through their revision, and that was Staff Governance and Remuneration Committee. So they've now gone through their committees, they've been reviewed, they've also now been considered and endorsed by the Audit Committee. So they're here for your agreement. So I'm offering substantial assurance on the full suite of the components of the Code of Corporate Governance, and that will now be updated and put back onto our web and communicated throughout the organisation.
Are there questions on these terms of reference? Don't see any hands so going up, so we're being asked to approve the revised terms of reference for staff governance and remuneration as proposed by the Audit Committee and to take substantial assurance. I'll be happy to do that. Okay, thank you. Then we move on to item 10, which is the annual board and committee work plans. And again, Ruth.
Yep, so this report is seeking the board's approval for the work programmes for the next financial year. That's for the board and for the governance committees. The work plans cover a range of activities that include statutory reporting duties, some regular items of business, and some priority planned pieces of work. So these have been considered and agreed by the governance committees throughout the last cycle of meetings, and they're here now for the board's confirmation and approval. So I'm offering substantial assurance on the matter, and they're here for the board's approval.
Thank you, Ruth. I noticed in 3.8, Ruth, that there's some dates to be added for the meetings that took place in the route to the meeting.
In 3.8. Sorry, yes, my apologies. That is incomplete. I can see now what you're talking about. Yes, those are the meetings that have taken place within the last cycle of meetings. So that's in February and March. My apologies for omitting that.
And the question about the date in regard to the quarterly whistleblowing report for March 2023 for the board meeting. We talk about the whistleblowing report for 21-22. It's quarter three. Is that correct?
No, it's 22-23.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other observations, questions, comments? Alan.
Yeah, just in regards to environmental sustainability and meeting our net zero targets, a letter came in to, I don't know, I think maybe you got it, Boyd and Pam, in regards to how this was going to be profiled by the board. So when I'm looking through that in the work plan, we did say that we were going to feed it through the Finance Performance Review committee, but I don't see that as a standing agenda item, which we'll probably need to add it in. But I would also have expected something coming to the board at some point on making sure that we were meeting our targets. I'm not sure, Boy, but a letter did come in asking, you know, how the board was going to be cited on our meeting our targets. So it just, I'll put that out there for everyone.
Maybe one for Ruth, for you to liaise with Pam about that.
Sure, certainly I can, and I'll catch up with you, Alan, about that. We can include that in the FRP and sequence that through to the board thereafter. Yeah.
Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Boyd. Yeah, I agree, Alan. That should be on as a standing agenda item, and I'll talk to Ruth and Brian about that. The only other one for us, Ruth, is the maternity paper, the business case. It should have been taken in March, as it was identified in the work plan, but that's now been moved into May.
Yes, that's right. And Pam will make comment on that in her verbal update to you later on in this meeting.
Okay, thanks.
That could be added to the board meeting as well.
Yeah.
Okay, any further points? If not, we're just being asked to approve the board and committee work plans for the coming year, 23-24. Happy to do that. Thank you. And we move on to item 11, which is the quarterly whistleblowing standards assurance report for Q3. Fiona.
Thanks, Chair. So yes, for this quarter, we didn't have any new whistleblowing cases lodged, and we did conclude on 3 cases, which means that we've got 2 cases still open, although since the report period, that one of those other cases has now closed. So our only open case currently is a long-standing case, which we've deliberately kept open in order to work through a fairly extensive service redesign and engagement process. So when we look back across the whistleblowing since April 2021, overall we've had 18 concerns raised and 9 investigated as whistleblowing. And one of the things that we've recognised is that patient safety and quality has been the main area of complaints and concerns raised. So for the Q4 report onwards, we are going to further break down the categories that we record, because actually patient safety and quality has got a number of different aspects. So those subcategories are likely to relate to data and reporting issues, staffing and resource issues, behaviours and relationships, specifically again impacting on safety and quality, and also our compliance with standards, practices and processes. So we should be able to retrospectively recategorise all of the cases to date in order to have those new categories in place. One of the other things we're looking to do to improve the reports is, as part of our tracking, to have a clear status and outcomes that are described in the same way, so that we can easily report on themes and trends, as well as the detailed narrative that you'll always find at the back of the report. And that will help us to take action where we see trends happening outside individual cases. We're also developing our learning insights, and so the annual report, which will come back to the board in July, will have a more detailed section on that. But where there are any actions identified, we have named senior colleagues taking these forward. I've also been taking part in developing guidance, which has been coordinated by the Independent National Whistleblowing Office, and that's going to be published shortly. And that's more specific information targeted at various groups, including HR teams, some for managers and some for confidential contacts, as well as a series of case studies, which I think will be really helpful. And those have been informed by our learning and the learning of other boards. And I think all of this is really helpful in terms of bringing the process and the standards to life. So when those are available in April, in NHS Highland, we'll be taking the opportunity to re-promote the standards, where to get information and the process that we follow, with a dedicated section on the internet site. And that will give us another opportunity to remind people. However, I think it is always important that when we talk about whistleblowing, we talk about that in the context of our wider importance and focus on listening to and responding to concerns when they arise. As a common theme across almost all of our whistleblowing cases is that they could have been resolved much earlier if somebody had listened or felt empowered to take action when it was first risen. And so that time, space and compassion to listen to what's happening and consider what could be done is important. And I think that's particularly important in the current climate, where there is a wider narrative of systems pressures and workforce challenges, and that could mean that we aren't focusing on the here and now and the specific situation about what we could do for an individual and how we could support them, because we feel kind of powerless against the wider pressures. So I think that needs to be a core part of how we position raising concerns and speaking up, and positioning whistleblowing in the context of that's the place where people then go if they don't get the right support or response, or if it's not taken forward. The other thing probably just to mention is that we have seen an increase in the number of cases that are then reported to the Independent National Whistleblowing Office. So we've currently got a couple of cases that are being reviewed, and we provide documentation and information into that process. All of our outcomes when we deliver them include clear reference that the INWO can be brought in if people aren't happy with the outcome. And it's important that we welcome that challenge and review, as we won't always get things right. And finally, in terms of the level of assurance, which is proposed as moderate, we are expecting to return to a substantial level of assurance in May, and that is specifically as a result of the publication of the further INWO guidance and the updated processes that we'll be providing as part of that, which closes down our final audit action. So happy to hand back to Chair for any questions.
If you want that explanation, elements of the paper, invite questions or comments. Muriel.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a really positive way to go with the safety and quality addition to it. I think that's really, really good. Thank you.
Thanks, Muriel. Bert.
Thank you, Chair. I would really just like to add to some of the comments and remarks made by Fiona and to support what she has said. Quite a few points I'd like to touch upon, if I may. I don't want to take up a lot of the board's time, but I think it's important to have this conversation. I think it's fair to say, as indeed Fiona said, that over this past number of months, there has been an increase in concerns raised regarding patient safety. And I think it's important for us to understand and recognise that. And I think the further interpretation of the data in relation to that is something that we need to take forward. And of course, Fiona has talked about that. We're 2 years in to the national standards. And I've been saying for a little while now, I think it's an appropriate juncture to pause, to take stock, and to reflect on where we are, where we have been, where we are going, and what we need to do to get there. And I think that's something that the board needs to consider. I've had these conversations with Fiona and indeed others, but it is my view that to continue this positive journey that the board has been on, it is an important step. The learning from concerns that have been raised is really very important to identify what may have gone wrong and how to prevent that happening. And I'm happy that there is a process in place to ensure that that learning is implemented. But of course, it is ensuring that the learning is sustained. And that is sometimes a difficult thing to achieve. One of the things I wanted to mention, and I've spoken about in other fora, is the investigation of complaints. And I think that we need to take some time to guide and support and to help those who have been given concerns to investigate. And it can be a pretty complex landscape. And I think it's important that we invest some time in providing that support. I think one thing that will help is the renewed or the refreshed guidance that is coming from the INWO that Fiona talked about. I know Fiona's been involved with the drafting of that at a national level, and I think that should be in the public domain within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Once that's in place, I think it's important as a board that we just take some time to consider how we can promote what is in that refreshed guidance and also identify how we can support members of staff who are having to investigate concerns, which can indeed be very complex. And I suppose perhaps just the final thing, and Fiona touched upon this herself, is that in my observation is that in many occasions, concerns have reached a stage that they ought not or need not have reached. And they get to a stage where a whistleblowing concern is raised, whereas early and timely and appropriate intervention could have avoided things getting into a formal process. Formal processes can become stressful, they become time-consuming, and very often that can be avoided by the timely intervention by line managers and indeed other colleagues, because these things don't actually have to go to the whistleblowing process. In fact, I would suggest the better option is that it's resolved in other means, but in a means that allows the individual who's got the concern to have the satisfaction and the assurance that it's being properly looked into. So I guess that really just covers what I wanted to say. We'll be looking forward to the next annual report before much longer. But perhaps it's an appropriate time just to invite the board to think about what we're seeking from the report. There are some requirements that are contained in the standards that we must report on, but the board may have a view on other information that they would like to hear about, either in the setting of the formal report or during a board session. I'll pause there, Chair. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Fiona, do you want to respond to any of these points?
Yeah, I obviously appreciate Bert's input there, and I think one of the things that we do have, excuse me, I've still a slight frog in my throat. One of the things that we do have scheduled in is a joint development session between the Staff Governance Committee and the Area Partnership Forum, and actually that the sort of purpose of that is really to bring kind of executives, non-executives and staff side colleagues together to talk about that sort of looking back and looking forward around the standards and the broader topic of raising concerns. And actually listening to Bert there, I think it would be helpful for us to maybe extend that membership just slightly further to make sure it's not just executive colleagues, but maybe some of our key sort of senior managers or senior professional leaders who can participate in that forum. The second thing that we absolutely want to plan and do is further I guess sort of training and awareness raising on the back of the new materials coming out. And I think once we've got that final suite of materials, if it may not fully address the questions we have around investigations and how we do that, but one of the reasons we've held off on kind of doing an overall process for ourselves is so that we can put whatever we need that's specific to NHS Highland over the top of that, but then link into all of that really good content that's been drafted nationally. But I think, as Bert said, we've got quite a lot of different cases that have been raised with different outcomes and different challenges. So I think it absolutely is the right time, I think, in a number of forums for us to think about both the whistleblowing process and the standards and how we continue to adhere to them, but to have that conversation in the context of that wider, kind of willingness to listen and to respond to concerns that underpins all of this.
Did you want to come back on any of that?
No, I don't, Chair. Thank you. I think Fiona has covered it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bert. Alex.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Fiona, the KPI table, section 6, I think it's on page 105 of the combined papers. Table itself to the left is fine, but I couldn't understand because there's no heading on the bit that's on the right hand side. Now I'm assuming it's rolling, but I don't know that, and as a result it really makes no sense without the heading to it. Can you clarify? And I'm thinking about it not so much just now, but in future reports as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Alex, and I think I think actually there's we've got a bit of an issue here. I spotted this when I was just rereading the paper. It should be. I think we previously had a year-to-date column, and obviously it's now supposed to represent everything since the standard started. But I think it's one of these areas where we just need to define that. And actually, a couple of the points like open concerns under investigation, actually that figure isn't quite right, because obviously it doesn't quite make sense. So I think we've got an opportunity there to re-look at that now again, and to make sure the headings are in, but also to make sure the data points we're reporting do make sense where we've got them in. So we'll pass that on.
Thanks, yeah.
The very same question, Alex, as you had regarding that table. Any other questions, comments? Fiona, just in terms of your reference in 2.3 to the national toolkit that you've been involved in developing, what will that constitute?
Yes, so that's the both Bert and I have referred to that it's effectively a number of guidance documents and case studies targeted at different sectors of the workforce that might get involved in the standards. So I see there's a piece that's around targeted at individuals who might want to raise a concern. There's a piece for managers who might be involved in either managing a concern or managing someone who's raised a concern. There's one for HR teams, because quite often there can be some crossover between the subject matter of a whistleblowing case and an employment process. And then whilst in Highland we have the guardians acting as our confidential contacts, in other boards that is individuals as well. So there's specific guidance for them. So that's all going to be made available. And I think one of the positives there, and when we fed this back, it will be hosted on the INMO site, and that's quite important, because whilst we might have some overarching context that we put on the top of that from a version control and a keeping up to date perspective, I'm always really keen that we don't take documents and customize them, that we sort of keep referring back to that source document that the INMO will keep up to date, and we just put anything else we need around it.
Thanks, Fiona. I could just reinforce what Bert was saying about the need for training for some event, like a workshop, I think had been suggested, and you referred to a forum yourself. I think it's extremely important that we develop that plan. And can I also just take this opportunity of commending the work that Fiona and Gay indeed and Bert have done in adopting and implementing the standards. It's involved a considerable amount of endeavour, and really want to say how much we appreciate the way in which it's been done and how it's been successfully introduced to the board, albeit there will be further refinements required going forward. Okay, we're being asked to take moderate assurance from this report in relation to our compliance with whistleblowing standards. Are we happy to do that? Thank you. Moving on now to two substantial items, first of which is the Social Mitigation Action Plan, and I invite Tim to speak to that.
Thank you, Chair. The two papers that are presented now have a fair bit of commonality about them, although they represent two different aspects of that same thing. It's really around the inequalities, both health inequalities and health inequalities due to deprivation and wider inequality issues. So the first paper, agenda item 12, is an update and a progress report. Really, the social mitigation strategy grew out of COVID and the wider effects of COVID on society as a whole. There were a lot of issues that affected people and people's health that followed on from COVID far more widely than simply the effect of the illness. It's more the effect of lockdown and the effect of changes in society were very profound. Clearly, there are issues around things like education and access to schools, but the social mitigation strategy mainly focused on working age and implications of working age, which would affect families as well. In particular, it was around access to money, with various different sectors of the economy suffering from the effects of COVID. Some of the particular examples would be around tourism, where many individual businesses and parts or wholes of people's livelihood were greatly affected, but also in other areas of the wider economy, businesses shut down, and there were fewer opportunities for income, and that's additional to the other issues around COVID of psychological illness, of bereavement, of long COVID, which is certainly a major issue, although not the subject of this paper. So in view of the economic circumstances, the social mitigation plan was drawn up and was taken to the board in May 2021. What the agenda item 12, the paper for that, does is to update on progress against the social mitigation plan. So I'm sorry to say that it's not entirely clear from the paper around what the ask is from board members, but essentially it is an ask to note the paper and to note the assurance and the activities that are given under the paper. Clearly, when we're looking at the wider society and the economy in the broad sense of economy, that the health board is only one of many players in influences on society. I think we're a key player, but there are others across the public sector, private sector, and third sector as well. So what the social mitigation strategy is really about is about playing our appropriate part in the mitigation of social factors from COVID-19. Progress, I think it's fair to say, has been I suppose moderate, and that is reflected in the degree of assurance that is down on the paper to give to the board. There are a range of schemes that have been set up, both locally and nationally, and the theme, I suppose, if there's an overall theme in how they're reported, is that things have got set up and are started to get underway, but the overall progress, I suppose, is not as good as we would have hoped. Some areas have had more progress. I think that the progress on welfare information, welfare rights, and helping people to understand what they're entitled to, and making sure that people are getting money that they're able then to use to improve their circumstances, particularly through the money counts work, has gone reasonably well. Other elements around which may be more long term, around change, for example, around changes to the workforce, have got underway, but they'll take longer to deliver. One thing to say, which isn't probably explicitly included within this report or the following report, but is important, and certainly in the future will get a much higher profile, is the way that the work on inequalities in general is related to the board's strategy. There is a theme on health inequalities which runs right through the board's strategy, but like a lot of the work that's presented in this paper and the following paper, there's still a lot of work to do in order to get that operationalised and to get the results of the focus on health inequalities delivered. So that's why it's not included in this in what is really in the case of both papers, a look back rather than a look forward. But when we look forward into work on health inequalities, it's clear that the work across the strategy will be fundamental to that. So in terms of the social mitigation report, I'm very happy to take questions on it. Moderate assurance is what we are suggesting, because while activities have been underway, there are some activities which are getting underway and should make a really positive impact. There is still an awful long way to go, and we're only a part of that way for the whole economy in the broad sense of Highland and Argyll and Bute.
Thank you, Tim. And invite colleagues to make contributions, ask questions to occur to you. Sarah.
Thanks. Thanks, Tim. I really enjoyed reading this paper, actually. It was really interesting. I've got one kind of broad question and one specific question. And sorry, Boyd, I'm kind of spanning item 12 and item 13 with my stuff here. So just following on from something you said there, Tim, about, we are not the only players here. And obviously we are in control of the actions that we can take to try and address some of the challenges. But actually there's work to be done with partners as well. And I know we've obviously got really strong links in with our community planning partnerships, which is kind of, to me, the logical place where that discussion would happen. But I'm interested to know if the approach to this work has the same kind of rigor around it at community planning partnerships. And I appreciate that it is largely what you're talking about at community planning partnerships is trying to address inequalities and tackling these problems. But I suppose I'm reading, the paper 13 and looking at how that's all been pulled together. And I'd be interested to know if we've got that level of robustness in a partnership setting. I'll maybe let you answer that question before I come back with my next one.
I think the answer to that is probably an awful lot of a way to go. These two papers are principally about our own work as part, that what we do as a board in putting into that partnership agenda, and I suppose what we do as an anchor institution, which is a concept which I think is particularly important in the inequalities agenda, to say that we are a major institution in terms of the support for the different communities across our area, but also as an employer and as a user of different services which we can choose to provide, which we can choose to have from various areas, and are a major influence that will always be here in the different areas. So we like local authorities and other agencies are anchor institutions in the local area. So we have our own individual responsibilities as those anchor institutions. And the papers largely reflect that, and certainly the paper that I'll come on to later really is about our statutory obligations for that and what we need to do in terms of inequalities more widely. In terms of the community planning partnerships, I think it is certainly more of a challenge, and I think we've got a way to go with the rigor and with the monitoring, probably for everything. I think one of the challenges in general with partnership working is that partnerships themselves often are not able to do things because they don't have resources. It's the agencies that are parts of the partnership that have resources, and the trick or the win is to get more value out of working together than out of working singly. But when people say a partnership needs to do this or needs to do that, the partnership generally is only what the individual organisations can make it. So I think that, I suppose from a social mitigation point of view, one could argue it's really pretty well the most important task of community partners working together to support what happens around people's health and well-being, but also people's economic well-being, and bringing job opportunities, also educational opportunities around. So I think that we could take a far more rigorous and perhaps a bolder approach to doing that, working with the other partners. I think it's certainly an opportunity, but it'll need quite a lot of commitment.
Thanks, Tim. Is it okay if I come back with just a very
Sure.
quick question, Boyd? So just with regards to the Money Matters training, that was really interesting. I was pleased to see that. I suppose given the cost of living crisis, given where we are, with that kind of challenge, I did notice that, it's just started to roll out, so the numbers are fairly low in terms of our staff that have been trained. Are there plans to roll that out more widely? Because I would imagine that a great number of our staff may encounter, or maybe it might not be directly their role to talk to people about money challenges, but I'm sure people will come across it in their interactions with our communities.
Yes, I think there are two elements to that. One is simply the mechanisms for doing that, and I think the launch of an app and having a bit more ways to communicate the issues will be helpful. I think what is one of the key issues is actually, I use the word a little bit cautiously, but it's a cultural change, but different from a lot of the cultural changes that we've talked about in other circumstances. It's to include these type of issues in the approach from our staff to patients or to clients, and to I mean, it happens with other issues as well, and is a very long-standing thing. And it's not just a local issue at all. It's certainly a national issue, of making sure that the opportunities for wider help are recognised by the professionals as being part of their remit, and that they can actually potentially signpost people in as part of their normal contact. It's sort of a bit like every contact counts in a way, to make sure that every contact count is more around people generally giving health advice, but this is about health people giving general advice. So many people, I think, would not necessarily regard it as their role to do that, and there's people may go on training, and I've had issues elsewhere, in not in Highland, but in former work, where loads of people say went on health through warmth training as health care professionals, but it was very rarely then raised and referred to the agencies to get the help. People knew what to do or had been trained in what to do, but didn't actually operationalize that. So I think that's the real that's the real challenge. And I think for several things that we're putting out, there are various schemes that are in the 2 papers, and the schemes are there, but the usage at the sort of the user end is still very, very low. So we really need to translate that. So it's partly around getting more people through the training for money matters, but it's also a longer and probably more fundamental task of helping people to recognise that that is part of their work, and being able to find the opportunities to do that, because everybody's really busy, and it's trying to include things as a part of normal care, rather than to say, well, here's something extra you've got to do. You've got to talk about people's money. So it's not straightforward, but it's certainly something that we want to expand and build on.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Tim. Alex.
Thanks, Boyd. Yeah, very interesting paper, Tim. The question about the community linked workers, that seems to be very successful by the report in there, and we're doing really well with that. What's the plans to expand it? I noticed that there's an issue about recruitment that's mentioned as a challenge. Is this something that you're looking to move from the third organisation to something else, so we can get a framework involved? How are we going to move forward with that? Because that looks like it's working, so we should be building on that, I think. Thanks.
Yeah, it is working. I think, like many things, it's a little bit variable. By and large, community link workers have been directed to areas of deprivation, and we've got specific funding coming in to fund community link workers. So at the moment, and of course, given our overall financial position, the ability to expand the community link worker scheme is restricted by the finances available, and we need to prioritise, and prioritising as we'd expect through areas of deprivation. We also need to look at the effectiveness of them in different areas, and there's work being done in conjunction with UHI around looking at how the link workers work in rural areas and how effective they are. So to an extent, we need to wait for the to get the results from that to know how best then to develop and to deploy the service. It may be that in some practice areas it works better than others, and there may be potential to redeploy different staff across the area, depending on changes on need, and changes in use. I mean, really, it needs to be seen perhaps as part of a holistic service, because lots of people will go to their GPs with requests that are best managed in other ways, and that's really what the community link workers are there to do. I think it's probably we need to see it as part of holistic care that can be delivered in different ways. It needs to be delivered with quality and professionally, but we need to take whatever opportunities that there are in order to do that. So for example, in the partnership working in the Cairngorms that we've got this with the Heritage Horizons programme that we're a partner with, that has different sorts of link work that we're referring people from practices in. So it's not part of the formal link worker scheme, but it's very similar. And I think we need to develop that with the same principles, but essentially it's being able to identify what people need, and how best to support them. And we do need to recognise that it's also potentially quite resource intensive, because you can't just say to somebody, well, I think you need to I don't know, go along to the leisure centre, or go to a men's shed, or something like that. Even if the resources are there, people aren't going just to turn up just because somebody says, oh, this would be a good idea for you. There needs to be that interaction, that relationship building, potentially actually going along with people to things. It needs to be effective. It needs to be personalised, and it takes time. And it takes effort. So it's really good to see how the schemes are working, but again, like everything, it needs to be, we need to take it seriously, and support it, and then, given the finances, try to work with whatever opportunities we've got to build on it.
Thanks. And Alex, did you want to come back at all? No. Okay, Jerry.
Thank you, Boyd. Tim, I believe you've probably already picked up many of the points that I just wanted to raise, but we had an excellent report at the last Health and Social Care Committee from the third sector interface on probably primarily the inputs and the outputs rather than the outcomes from the Community Mental Health and Wellbeing Fund, which has been managed through the third sector interface, and it struck me very much using the lens of the community link workers, how it seemed to be at a very high level. It seemed to be identical issues which were being raised there, and it just took me down that whole route which we've been speaking about this whole partnership working, and how we make sure all the services are coming together and we don't have all these series of individual working, and how we maximise the synergy which we've got to do there. So I'd be very interested as we move forward to actually understand how we're actually going to try and do that, because as you say, that many of the issues of people are common now. People are facing a multiplicity of issues now. It's very rare now that we'll come across anyone who's in fuel poverty, who's not in food poverty, who's not got other welfare issues, and these are all linked. So, and it's particularly challenging as well, given that the community mental health and wellbeing money ends in 5 days' time, which is not particularly helpful, or maybe hopefully something will replace it. So I think it's, for me, as we move forward, is how we ensure that we're getting that full partnership arrangement to get the biggest gain we can get for the little money that we have. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, I certainly agree with Jeremy, and I think the other issue around this area, which I think is we really need to make sure that we can grasp, is how we get the full engagement with and drive by individual communities, because it's very often in the communities where that and it was seen during COVID with the isolation and the nature of our areas. There are lots of different communities, some of which are quite isolated from each other, but they have their own community spirit and their own community activities, and are able to deliver an awful lot. And so we need to be particularly careful in the partnership working that we don't try and just drive the top-down partnership. And the voluntary sector, the third sector, is clearly very good at getting that right. But we need to work out the best ways to empower local communities to be able to develop the resources, because we'll get far more value out of that than if we give top-down approaches. Now, that's not it's not to say, oh well, we give everything to the to communities and let them do that, because of course there's the what's the critical mass in communities, and I think community link workers is an interesting thing that to some extent it's inevitably going to be top down, because it's come from external money and it's based within the practices, but the actual delivery and the way that the community link workers work can be and should be community based, so that they link in well with the individual community resources. So I think, yeah, it is a big challenge in getting down to much smaller communities than the individual parts of the community planning partnerships, but that at least that's a start if we can work through them.
Your colleague Linda has joined you, I think, Tim, so just encourage her to come in at any point if she wishes to. Katrina.
Thanks, and thanks, Tim, for a couple of really interesting papers. I just on the community link workers, and I understand you're talking about a lot of constraints that there are within that project itself. But I'm just wondering, GP practice staff can refer. Is there any plans to extend that to other people referring? Because there are plenty of people out there who are either not requiring GP services or don't perceive that they're requiring GP services, but may require assistance that would benefit from a community link worker.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. I think one of the challenges that we've got is the limit in resources at the moment, because we can't even at the moment provide community link workers to all practices, and we've got some general practices that would absolutely love community link workers, but because of the nature of the populations they serve and the prioritisation we've had to do, we haven't been able to provide community link workers. But I think there is certainly the it would certainly be a good idea to spread that more widely, because as you say, that I mean there are many groups of people who the classic group would be middle-aged to slightly older men who very rarely cross the doors of a general practice, even though their need may be quite high. So that they're the classic group where other approaches are needed. So I'd certainly agree with that, and I think again the challenge is to have the resources to deliver that.
Muriel.
Thank you, Tim, for the paper. Was there or has there been discussions through the Heritage Horizons and the Community Planning Partnership for Community Pharmacy to be part of the referring scheme? It certainly was talked about, but I don't know how far it has gone.
Yeah, I can't think. I mean, when Katrina was asking, I was trying to think of anything specific I could remember. I can't remember specific things, but perhaps if I can ask Linda, either now that she's joined us, whether she's aware of anything. She may want to comment on some of the broader issues around the paper, but I can't think. I mean, I think everybody recognises it's a good idea, but I can't recall specific issues around taking that forward. But certainly the scope may be more there in terms of resources with Heritage Horizons in the future, but I'm still a bit uncertain about the current position.
Linda?
Yeah, no, I'm kind of with Tim about, I don't know about the specifics of that particular funding and conversations there's been with pharmacy and community planning. But I was just thinking, as people were asking the questions, that of course community link workers are not the only way of social prescription, if you like. So there are sort of other places and ways that we can use social prescribing. I guess it's just a little bit more complex when they're not necessarily employed within NHS or within GP practice and so on. But there are lots of different examples of other ways in which that's happening. The trick probably is, how do we coordinate that in a way that we know that we're covering those that need it the most? And that's probably where we need to do a bit of work around mapping out, well, where is social prescribing taking place and who are they, and are we supporting them in terms of information that's available and so on. But I'm sorry, I don't know the specifics around pharmacy or conversations with community planning around that. I can't add anything more to that, I'm afraid, sorry.
But certainly I can guarantee to members that we will certainly bear those strongly in mind in terms of future discussions, because it's really it's important to spread out the opportunities.
Are there any further contributions, questions? Tim, see any hands up? Clearly, there's been a lot of positive benefits and impacts, Tim, from the data that you've supplied us with in the paper. But even at that, you've only suggested taking moderate assurance on this. You see that further implementation of the mitigation work is required to raise it to substantial. Are we happy to take moderate assurance then from Tim's paper, which gives confidence of compliance with legislation, policy and board objectives? Are we content? Thank you. We move on to item 13, and we have Pam with us. She's survived the Health and Sport Committee. We'll hear more about that from you in the afternoon, Pam. Item 13, the qualities, outcomes and mainstreaming report, and as Tim said, these two items overlap, and ask Tim to speak to this paper.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this is sort of the second of the two suites of papers, and this is more around statutory requirements, and it asks for board approval. There are three elements to the paper, and essentially the paper is supporting the appendix, and I think there's been a little bit of problem in terms of some members being able to, or some confusion around the appendix, but essentially it's on from the combined papers on page 130, entitled NHS Highland Equality Outcomes and Mainstreaming Report 2021 to 2023, and that's the document that I'm asking board members to approve in the context of a wider debate. And that document comes itself into three parts. There is the introduction, the mainstreaming, and the equality outcomes. The mainstreaming talks about a variety of equality and diversity issues, including those we've already touched on for social mitigation, and also including those that have been touched on in terms of the risk register, and we're talking about statutory and mandatory training, and how the board is working more to have equality and diversity as a fundamental and normal element of its day-to-day practice. But there are also equality outcomes, and these have been set to work towards by 2025. So a mainstreaming report was published and approved by the board in 2021, and that was for implementation by 2025. So this report is is a progress report on that. It does need to be submitted and is a formal report that needs approval, but it sets out progress on the 3 outcomes for equality and diversity that were identified in 2021. So they are outcome 1 in Highland, people from identified groups, including young people, have improved access to resources needed to support their mental health and well-being. Outcome 2, all individuals are equally safe and respected, and women and girls live free from all forms of violence and abuse and attitudes that perpetuate it. And outcome 3, in Highland, people from identified groups will have more control over the care and services that they receive. So the report outlines those outcomes. It outlines the statutory framework into which all this is set and looks at progress. So I'm very happy to take questions on it. There's a bit of overlap with the previous paper, and I'm asking for the board to approve the report. Just before I say that, I also like to welcome Eve MacLeod, who's the author of the paper, who has joined the meeting, who'll be able to take hopefully field specific questions. And also then there is quite a significant HR element to the paper around equality and diversity within the workforce, and so some of the questions may best be addressed by Fiona.
Thank you, Tim, for the introduction to the paper. It's a substantial piece of work, so we can invite colleagues to make contributions and ask any questions you may have. Anne.
So thanks very much for the report. There's obviously a substantial amount of activity taking place around these issues. I noted that on, I think it was page 21, there was a comment that EQIA was thought to be mainstreamed in Argyll and Bute. And I just wondered if by default, the suggestion is that it's not mainstreamed in other parts of the organisation, or whether that is just an issue about the information available, or what. So I just wondered if anybody could comment on that.
I think it's probably just the way that the report is written, and sometimes that trying to bring together the work in the Highland Council area and in Argyll and Bute, when the sources are a little different, may give perhaps the wrong impression. I certainly wouldn't be under the impression that EQIA isn't embedded within across the board as a whole, but I don't know whether Eve would want to comment on that.
Thanks, Tim. I agree. I think it's just wording and different people adding into different sections of the report. But certainly in North Highland, we've updated some of the support resources on the intranet around EQIA. So there is additional support available for folks that are doing EQIAs. And as far as publishing on the website goes, I guess we could be seeing some more of that, but that'll come with a new website as well. Thanks.
Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Boyd. Thanks for that, Tim and Eve. It's an excellent paper. The bit that really interested me was the Planet Youth stuff that's in there. That looks very interesting, very exciting. But there was no indication of any early results. Are we seeing any benefits from it? When do we expect to see any benefits? When's the next survey going to be done that gives us an indication of how we're doing with it?
I think Eve may be better placed to answer that than me. I'm just waiting for some further information to come through to me in the next few days. I mean, a lot of the early work has been assessing baselines, but I don't know whether Eve can say further.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So for Planet Youth in North Highland and in Argyll and Bute, the next survey will take place September this year. So at the moment, we only have that initial year of survey findings. So like Tim says, the baseline, we have that available at the moment. However, there are action plans for the different areas. And then so for North Highland, although we only have the one set of results so far, we do have some kind of other measures that we can look at while we're progressing the actions. So far, nothing all singing or dancing that we can show you, and maybe that won't come in the first or in this next set of results just yet. It took time for them to see the results in Iceland, but there's a variety of measures that we're looking at, and we're confident that in time we will see results from this.
That's good, Eve. Thanks very much. Thanks for that.
Yeah, just to add, I think that some of the evaluation is difficult because it in a way the Planet Youth model is built on how community cohesion was built within Iceland, and it was about communities looking after their young people, being conscious about their young people and coming together, and some of that can be quite difficult to measure objectively. One of the results of Planet Youth was claimed to be Iceland's football victory over England a few years ago. So whether that would be an objective measure that people would want to use, so I think it may be a bit too difficult to judge, but I think there's a lot of evaluative activity that is underway, but it does take a bit of time to be able to put that out.
Any further questions or contributions? Response to the report? Anne again.
Well, I just wondered if Fiona, might want to comment at all on the staffing data in here and the work we're doing in that front. Obviously, the numbers are very small in a lot of cases, so maybe from the data, it's quite difficult to track outcomes from work we're doing. So I suppose I was wondering if she could say a little bit more about the ways that we try to support employees, particularly from the protected characteristic side of things in terms of support networks, and if there's anything that we can gauge from the engagement work that we do, perhaps iMatter or listening and learning survey or the app that we're introducing, or any other means of feedback that we have available from some of the groups that are represented in the HR data. Thanks.
Yeah, happy to sort of pick that up, Anne. And I think I suppose the report kind of highlights one of our challenges around data is that actually we still have a fairly low level of reporting around the protected characteristics, and that's something that we're keen to encourage people. Typically that's something that's collected when people join us through recruitment monitoring, and we're doing some work to improve how that can be updated through self-service. But actually the fact that we have a number of people who either tick the don't know or the don't want to disclose, I think in the absence of other data, means that actually we need to do further work in this area to make sure that people feel confident in sharing that information with us, and that we're thinking about how we can best support them. We have started to look at what networks we can set up, and the equalities aspect does form a core part of our ADP, and particularly for the coming year, we think that's a really important piece of work, and it naturally dovetails in with the work that we're doing around kindness and compassion and respect, but broadening that out, to make sure that where there are groups of colleagues who have concerns, that we're able to pick that up. And I think an important driver for that is going to be the national strategy around improving wellbeing and workplace cultures, which also has a strong equalities strand around it. That was due to be launched at the end of last year, but was paused to allow boards to get through the winter period. But that will be coming forward soon, and I've actually been asked to sit on the national strategy board around that. And so I think it's really important for Highland that we look at what information we do have locally, and any issues and actions we need to take, but also to tie into that national work and the support that's available there. So I think we've got good support for some groups. So our carer. Our carer network is very well established. We've got carer positive accreditation. We generally get around our awareness and support for colleagues with disabilities. I think it's our kind of ethnic minority, particularly, and also LGBTQ+ are probably areas where we need to have some targeted sort of actions around what more can we do to support colleagues. And I think the engagement point is really important, but we have to kind of create the space where people feel confident to come forward and to tell us what they need. And I think the sort of tools that we have, like iMatter and surveys, generally are a bit too blunt around that. So I think we need to think more about the kind of focus group approach and opening up those specific conversations to understand that better. The other area that is probably worth talking about towards the end of the report is around equal pay, because I think that the information and there's some good context set around it, but actually equal pay data can be quite challenging for us because we have an over 80% female workforce. And so what that means is that the data can be quite challenging to interpret. For example, if you look at the medical and dental information, it would suggest some inequity between male and female pay rates. But obviously the composition of that workforce and the time taken to progress is quite significant. Whereas when we look at the senior management workforce, actually, that's the sort of the sort of female workforce are typically paid around 10% more than the males, but actually that reflects the fact that we probably have more female senior managers than males, and particularly, for example, in our exec team, we've actually got a 2/3 female to 1/3 male kind of cohort. So I think it's a really helpful report for us in terms of thinking, reflecting on where we are, and we'll be taking it to Staff Governance Committee at the next meeting. And I think the other area that forms a core part of our ADP that we've been making some good progress on is around the sort of underrepresented groups and areas where, to the last report, around kind of where people have traditionally struggled to find employment and training pathways. And for example, we've got a health pathway that's been introduced with S4 and above students in a number of schools across Highland, and we've got 29 young people have signed up for that. So I think there's a lot of activity ongoing, but we've got a lot of focus needed on this going forward. And I think that finding a way to really gather the insights from people's experience needs to be the sort of first thing we do to try and set a targeted set of actions to support it.
Jerry.
Thank you, Boyd. It was really just a general question, and it's following up really from, I think, Alex's point. Do we have agreed evaluation methodologies and measures for how we're actually going, when the time is right, Tim, for how we're actually going to measure the outcome that's been arising from all these actions rather than the outputs that's been arising from all of these actions. And I don't honestly don't know how we will measure some of the outcomes, but and again, I'm going back to the Community Mental Health and Wellbeing Fund, which was administered through the third sector interface. The Scottish Government evaluation criteria was very much about outcomes rather than outputs, and so I'm just interested how we start to get into that space as well, and what our timeline might be.
I think, yeah, it's a very good question, and I think there's certainly an awful lot more work to do. I think we are able to judge progress on what we set ourselves within the programme from 2021 up to 2025. So I'm confident that we'll be able to judge that, but I think more so in terms of the population impact and even the workforce impact in terms of outcomes, I think there's more that we need to do. And I think a lot of the measures that we look at, and a lot of the measures that we looked at earlier in the IPQR, are around really process or output measures rather than outcome measures, and even things like treatment time guarantee. I mean, they're very important, but they're not real outcome measures around the health of the health of the population or the health of individuals. They're markers on the way to that, and I think a lot of what's being considered within this paper are markers on the way to better outcomes. And I think we've got a long way to go, and I think it's one of the aspects generally. I think it's one of the aspects that the board probably needs to consider in performance in general is around where we are looking at, but other boards as well. We're certainly not an outlier in that, as far as I'm aware, but around how we genuinely assess what outcomes we're looking for. So I think from the technicalities of the paper, and assuming there aren't many questions left, we'll be coming to assurance in a minute. And I think that I'm happy that with requesting substantial assurance, because I think we are measuring what we intend to measure and what we're asked to measure. But I think you're right that there is a step beyond that we ought to consider regarding genuine outcomes. But it's a challenge, but I think it's one that we should take up.
Thanks, Tim. Any further questions, points for Tim and for Eve? Just one from me, Tim. On page 28, you refer to the introduction of care opinion in 4 test sites across the area. I wonder if you could expand on that and tell us how that's going.
I think I'd need to ask Eve on that, or so either Eve would know or we'd be able to just to confirm that outside the meeting. So Eve, are you able to comment on that?
Thanks, Tim. The second option you mentioned there, so we'll be able to confirm that outside the meeting. I don't have any further additional information I can provide you on that just now.
Thanks. I don't see any hands up at this point. So ask you, the recommendation is that this gives confidence of compliance with legislation, policy and board objectives, and we're being asked as a board to approve the draft equality mainstreaming and progress report and agree that the final report can be published in April. Are we content to do so? Okay, thank you, colleagues. In that case, I think we can now break early for lunch and give Pam just a little bit longer to think about what she's going to say after lunch. So we'll can we resume at 1:30? Would that be appropriate? Keep the 3/4 of an hour break, but resume at 1:30. Thanks.